Good morning, everybody. My name is Bailey Brooks, and thank you for spending this however long time with me today. Today, we're going to be talking about culturally responsive school psychology practices in Virginia. So there are 45.2% of the US population are culturally and linguistically diverse students, CLD students. Despite this rapid growth in the United States, Virginia's population has grown more slowly. Virginia encompasses rural, urban, and suburban areas. However, only 95% of that population growth is in 3 regions, and those 3 regions are Hampton Roads, Richmond, and Northern Virginia. Some areas of Northern Virginia have a high foreign-born population, indicating that that area is pretty culturally and linguistically diverse. But despite this diversity, 62% of residents in the state of Virginia are white. So going back to nationwide student population, out of 45.2%, 87% of school psychologists identify as white, and 86% of school psychologists only speak English. So that's a pretty big discrepancy between culturally and linguistically diverse students and the representation in school psychology. By 2045, it's estimated that most population growth will be due to immigration. So it's important to keep in mind that this is complicated by the fact that school psychologists and majority of educators are white and they only speak English. So how do we combat this discrepancy? Well, by using culturally responsive practices, embedding culturally inclusive practices in curriculum too, also having a social justice lens. In fact, the Virginia Academy of School Psychologists released a statement indicating the need for school psychologists to dismantle racism and model anti-racism work. So throughout this presentation, there are 3 terms that I'm going to be referring to multiple times. So it's good to have an idea of what these mean. So cultural humility is a lifelong self-awareness and reflection of one's own values, beliefs, and cultural identity while learning about other cultures. Cultural competency is having knowledge, attitude, and skills for working with CLD students and their families. And culturally responsive practices are effective teaching and assessment practices that meet the needs of CLD students in the school environment. So cultural competency and cultural humility can be confusing and hard to distinguish. So hopefully this example helps. So let's say you're a school psychologist and you know a lot about what schools look like in Mexico. You know what daily life expectations are for kids. So when you have a student who transfers to your school who just came from Mexico, you might have an idea of what their school life looked like. That's a cultural competency lens. A cultural humility lens is having an understanding that you may not know everything about what schools in Mexico look like or the culture in Mexico, but you're committed to learning more. It's also acknowledging that there are different systems affecting the child, not just the fact that they came from this country or that school is the only thing impacting them. So when all 3 concepts of cultural competency, cultural humility, and culturally responsive practices are implemented, school psychologists are better able to challenge systems and help discuss ways to implement change in schools with teachers, principals, and other educators. The goal of cultural humility is more profound than being culturally competent because it's a lifelong process. Consequences of practitioners having cultural humility include having respect, optimal care, mutual empowerment and understanding, and advocacy in relationships and partnerships. So implementing CRP in the curriculum is critical for education, and we're seeing this shift now in schools. Because school psychologists are trained in systems change, they're better able to implement change with faculty and staff and help with this transition. However, the first step towards implementing culturally responsive practices is having a professional development for teachers and educators that invite self-reflection about one's own biases and beliefs about others. And this is important because this also encompasses the cultural humility piece, because it's that self-awareness, that reflection, and lifelong learning. Multicultural school psychology is a relatively new concept, but advocacy and competency go hand in hand in our practice. In fact, the 2020 NASP professional standards states that effective services, advocacy, and social justice for all students, families, and schools are reflected in school psychology practice. They also noted that school psychologists ensure that their knowledge, skills, and professional practices reflect an understanding and a respect for human diversity and promote effective services, advocacy, and social justice for all students, families, and schools. So again, they really want to make sure that we have this lens when we are working with students and families. This also allows for school psychologists to provide the most appropriate assessment and interventions for the student. And also, it's important to not dismiss other pillars of diversity, such as socioeconomic status, religion, and language. One thing that is interesting is that a lot of publications pertaining to social justice in school psychology is written through a Western perspective. And this is important because school psychology is international. These practices are international. I know in NASP, I saw people who were attending online in Dubai and Europe and all of that. So we do see school psychologists all over the world. And since advocacy and social justice are core components of our practice, it's important that the literature and the research reflects our role. So school psychology training, what we're all in right now, implementing culturally responsive practices, cultural competency, and cultural humility begins at the university training level, so where we are right now. The NASP 2020 standards suggested that social justice should be embedded in the graduate training curriculum. In the past, they've stated that, but they didn't really give an idea of what that looked like. And now with these standards, they're kind of giving more suggestions of how programs in schools can implement diversity education, and also monitoring that shift in training programs nationwide. So they're really making sure that students are being taught and trained in cultural competency and cultural humility to make sure that they are prepared to have that lens when they're out practicing. Research also shows that when graduate students have practicum experiences that involve CLD students, they have a higher cultural competence, specifically in knowledge, skills, and cultural appreciation. So now that we've kind of talked about the literature and background, now we're going to talk about the study. So the purpose of my thesis is to examine how cultural competency, cultural humility, and social justice impact a school psychologist's practice, as well as to explore how school psychologist practitioners, students, or trainers define terms such as cultural humility and social justice. The methodology. So just a quick snapshot of this study. This study is a collaborative with the VASP Social Justice Committee, and it's also a two-part study, which emphasizes the paradigm shift between cultural competency to cultural humility. This helps us better understand practitioners' experience in Virginia. The first part of the study measures a school psychologist's cultural competence to see their knowledge, attitude, and skill level with working with CLD students and families. The second section asks school psychologists to define terms such as cultural competency and cultural humility to see if there's consistency or inconsistency across the state. In addition, because this study is connected with the VASP Social Justice Committee, the study also hopes to learn how to better serve VASP members. So there are 3 research questions for this study that are divided into 2 parts. Part 1 is what's the perceived cultural competence of school psychologists in Virginia? And what is the relationship between perceived cultural competence and school psychology experience? In other words, does cultural competency differ based on how long a school psychologist has been practicing? And for this first part, it's hypothesized that there's a relationship between the level of cultural competence and years practicing as a school psychologist. The second part of the study asks how school psychologists define cultural humility. And it's hypothesized that there are going to be various definitions of cultural humility, which should include that lifelong awareness and self-reflection piece, because that's the key difference between cultural humility and cultural competency, is that reflection and awareness piece that's lifelong. So participants were 450 school psychologists were emailed as of April 12th. We aim to have at least 50 participants. So far, we have 26 responses. This was done through an electronic survey, which was sent out to every school psychology practitioner in Virginia through the Department of Education and the VASP member listserv. So demographic information is collected, including race, ethnicity, age, gender, languages spoken, how long a school psychologist has been practicing, not only just in Virginia, but as a whole. And these variables are going to be used to connect the participants' cultural humility and how their cultural identities shape their experience and practice as a school psychologist. Next, the School Psychology Multicultural Competency Scale, which was developed by Dr. Celeste Malone, who is going to be the NASP president in, I believe, next year or 2 years. She developed this scale. It's a 28-item self-report of multicultural competency for practicing school psychologists. And it has 4 subscales that represent 4 different domains in cultural competency. So it's cultural skills, cultural knowledge, cultural appreciation, and cultural awareness. So again, the procedure, all active practitioners in Virginia were recruited to participate in this study. The survey link was emailed through VASP and the Virginia Department of Education listservs. So for research questions 1 and 2, descriptive statistics will be run and a chi-square statistic will be used to examine the relationship between demographics of the school psychologist and their scores on those 4 domains of the school psychology multicultural competency scale. And for research question 3, a thematic analysis will be used to analyze the qualitative data using in vivo, which helps code different information to see how school psychologists define cultural humility. So this is a mixed methods study. And of course, this study will follow the ethical guidelines suggested by IRB. This was approved. There will be no deception. Participants were given informed consent, and they also have the opportunity to debrief, and they are thanked, and they have the opportunity to find out the results of this study if they choose. And these are my references. Yeah. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I look forward to seeing what my results will be. That's going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. I believe we're going to close the questionnaire around April 30th. So it's coming up. I think especially with the push through Virginia to have the social justice lens and perspective, I think this is a really critical time that this study is coming out. So I hope that it gives us a good insight and data to see where we can go from here to better serve students, families, and to just be better school psychology practitioners. So I look forward to completing this, and I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I don't know if I've already said that, but if I did, hope you enjoy it. That was the 3rd time. Have a great day, and thank you so much.